This is Spare Time Repair, and this is the Pioneer cassette deck that I looked at in a previous video. In that video I got everything up and running, but my attempts to improve the dim display were unsuccessful. If anything, it's even worse than it was before. Believe it or not, the display is currently on. And while this isn't a deal breaker, it has been bugging me ever since. So more in hope than expectation, I had a look on eBay to see if anyone was selling a replacement display. And to my surprise, I found one. Well, almost. So here on the right is the replacement display board from eBay, and here is my original on the left. And the reason I said it wasn't quite a direct replacement is because it's from a different model. And you can see that by the additional buttons we have here. The model this is from is the CT-W604RS, whereas mine is the CT-W604RS. The 803 is an upgraded version that features recording on both decks. So we have a record button here, which is missing from this one. Also, the displays themselves aren't quite the same. They have the same number of pins and the same physical size, but some of the text on the display is slightly different. But I took a gamble in assuming that the display should still work in the other machine. So because the boards are physically different, I can't just swap the whole board out, but I can temporarily hook it up and see if the display is any better than the one I had. Well, I've already hit a snag because my plan was to just temporarily connect this up. But interestingly, the socket at the top of the replacement board has an extra pin. You can see the connectors are actually in different physical positions as well, slightly staggered. But if I try and put it in this board, which is the replacement board, the extra pin means that there's a bit of wiggle room there, whereas in the original board, it's a tight fit. So I think the only way I can test this display is to physically remove it from the board and swap it out. So just looking at the backs of these two boards, you can see the connector has 31 pins on the replacement display and only 30 on the original, but the display itself has the same number of pins, 35. So I can't immediately see what that extra connector pin is doing. I mean, the trace is going completely different directions, so it's not easy to map it out. But hopefully the fact that the displays have the same number of pins means that the replacement display should still work. So this is the donor board, and as well as desoldering all these main connector pins, there's these two structural pins as well that need to be removed. So because I don't have a powered desoldering pump, I had to make do with this solder braid and a manual pump. It was pretty fiddly and probably took me about 15 minutes in total. Okay, the donor display has come out finally. Don't think there's any damage to the pins. So now I need to do the same to the other one. I've just removed the bad display from the original board. So now hopefully our new display will fit in here. I've just noticed, although the pin position is the same, the position of the mounting bracket is different. I don't think there's, or can I move that? Perhaps I can. I think it's just stuck on with double-sided tape, so I'll have to remove that first. Although that's easier said than done. I obviously don't want to lever anything too hard on here because this is glass and it's very delicate. So maybe I'll just run some isopropyl alcohol behind here and try and soften the adhesive. So I'm just going to use this blunt syringe, load it up with IPA. And I'll let that sit for a minute just to do its work. Meanwhile, I can clean up the pads ready to receive the new display. And while cleaning up the board, I noticed that I accidentally removed most of the solder from this diode here. So I'm just going to touch that up. There we go. So here are the backs of the two displays. You can see they have a slightly different part number at the top. And you can see the circuit pathways are a bit different as well. So I'm hoping that doesn't cause any issues. The original faulty display is the one at the top. And the two brackets are identical. They were just in slightly different positions. And now the alcohol has dried up, the adhesive is actually still tacky. So I should be able to reuse that with no problems. So the sensible thing would be to mount the bracket first. And I've got to get all these pins to line up, which could be tricky. So these first three aren't used, and we're working in this shaded area. I think they're all in the holes now. Yep, all the pins are through and it's sitting on the adhesive pad. Just going to remove these switch extensions. So we'll hopefully lay down a bit more flat. Now we can get it soldered back in. So finally we can test whether this thing actually works. This replacement display only cost me $10 including shipping. So it won't be a financial loss if it doesn't work, but I will be very disappointed. So I don't think I actually need the tape mechanisms connected to just test the display. So this should be all I need. And it should come on as soon as I plug it in, which is now. Excellent. Well, I don't think it's the best, but it's certainly better than what we had. And really the only things I'm interested in are the tape counters, the level meter, and the Dolby noise reduction settings. Let's see if that Dolby mode indicator works. So I think this turns it on. Yep, B, C, S. Now this display does have an orange lens, of course, so let's see what it looks like behind that. Yeah, again, not super bright, but certainly readable. So the new display is a great improvement, but that's not the end of the video, because having done some research, I discovered that the reason why many of these Pioneer displays go dim is down to a design flaw. With these decks, even when they're in standby mode, i.e. powered off, there's still voltage passing through the display. So although the display is blank, it's effectively on 24/7, which greatly reduces its lifespan. So to mitigate this problem, I'd like to install some kind of switch that disconnects the power from the display when the deck is not in use. So I could do that by fitting a physical switch somewhere on the front panel here, but that's going to look pretty ugly. It would be far more convenient to use something that's already here, and so I think the answer is to use these cassette insertion sensors. When you insert a cassette into the deck, these leaf switches at the top determine what kind of tape it is. This is done by reading the notches on the top of the cassette. Type 1, 2 and 4 cassettes have different notch patterns. What about type 3? Well, they have the same notches as type 1 and they're also pretty rare, so we can ignore those. So if we look at deck A, this is the sensor for type 2 cassettes and this is the one for type 4. So if both these switches are raised when the cassette is inserted, it means it's a type 1 cassette. If just this one is raised, it means it's a type 2 cassette. And if neither are raised, then it must be a type 4. Moving on to deck B, we have additional sensors looking for the write protection tab on the tape. And these determine whether it's a blank cassette that's inserted and that it can therefore record on it. For my purposes, I'm looking at this sensor in the middle. Since I don't own any type 4 tapes and I'm unlikely to ever get any, this sensor is going to be triggered every time I insert a cassette. So if I interrupt the voltage supply going to the display and connect it to this switch, the display should only come to life when a tape is present. I can link the type 4 sensors on both decks so that either one or both will turn on the display. To me, this is an acceptable compromise if it extends its life, because I don't need the display to be on if there's no cassette in place. Well, straight away I've hit a problem. I've got a cassette in the deck and the sensor's given me an ohms reading of 110. So it's not a direct short that I was hoping for. If I eject the cassette, we go open, and then when I insert it, we get about 100 ohms. I really need it to be less than that. Let's try deck B. Well, it's lower, enough to make it beep. We're still higher than I expected. Maybe the contacts just need cleaning. Well, first I should confirm that there is actually power going to the display when it's in standby. So hopefully you can see the device is currently in standby mode. So if I probe these pins of the display, yeah, you can see there's negative 23 volts DC. It's actually coming up on a number of these pins. So if I hold that there and turn it on, yeah, there's no change, it's the same voltage. So I can't interrupt multiple pins on this display with a single switch. So I'm wondering whether I could tap into the fuse. There's two glass fuses under this transformer board, so if we interrupt one of those, surely it's going to kill the power to the display. And so I've just removed that bottom fuse from here. Now, of course, when I plug it in, there's no power at all, but we still have negative 21 volts. What if I pop that fuse back in, remove the other one, plug it back in, it's still coming up. And still, even with both fuses removed, the fuses are only affecting these two pins, so they're not going to make any difference. So it looks like these N3 pins of the transformer output that we need to worry about. See, I was imagining that I'd be able to power the unit on and the display would be blank, and then as soon as I entered a cassette into either of the wells, the display would then come on. But I'm now thinking that won't be possible. Well, I think perhaps I'm trying to be too clever for my own good. If there was only one power rail to the vacuum fluorescent display, then I would know which one to interrupt and it wouldn't be an issue. But because there's several, I think it could do more harm than good if I mess around with it. I thought about taking out the motherboard and turning it over and seeing where the traces go, but I think I'm probably overthinking it. I mean, it's not like I'm going to be using this every day, so unplugging it between uses is not really a big problem. But the answer, I think, would be to mount a switch on the back of the unit that switches the mains power into the transformer. So that would effectively be the same as unplugging it between uses. But I'd definitely welcome any comments on this if you think there's a solution that I've missed. But for now, I'm just going to do it the simple way. Well, I suppose I should reconnect everything and make sure that the display still works properly when tapes are playing. So we're back together again. Check that the tape counters work. All looks good. The tape direction arrow. Real-time counter. And the other deck. You can see the display's still dim in places, but I think that's the best I'm going to get. I think the only disadvantage to fitting a mains power switch on the back is that the tape counters will be reset. So at the moment when you turn it off, back on, it remembers what they were, but that's certainly not going to bother me. It's nice that the reset works separately for the tape counter and the real-time counter. The new switch has arrived and it came with these insulated spade connectors. So I think it should probably go on this back corner next to the transformer. And I'm still a bit sad about not using the tape sensor plan, but I think putting AC voltage through a switch as small as this would not be a good idea. It'd probably be arcing and it could be dangerous. But I have noticed the switches have these small holes in them. And I wonder if that's for spraying contact cleaner in, because the resistance reading shouldn't be as high as it is. So I'm just going to try that. Might give us a better reading. It was about 115 before. Slightly better. I don't know, that's weird. So I've drawn out this template on a piece of masking tape, but I need to check that the case isn't going to foul it when that goes back on. Actually, that is quite wide, so there's not much room for it there. I don't want to cut into this text area because that would be quite ugly. So maybe it should go here. So that would mean the switch coming through here, but it does need to be reachable. I'm not planning to have anything else sitting on top of this unit, so I can just reach over the top, but that may change in future, so probably be better for it to go on this far side so that I could reach around the side if I had to. Looks like this rear panel comes off fairly easily, and it would make sense to remove it because I don't want metal shavings going all over the board. Wow, that came off even easier than I thought. Just 5 screws in the bottom. So you can actually see the line of where the casing comes, so I need to be within that. Check that square because it's going to bother me if it isn't. Okay, happy with that. Going to use a Dremel for this. I need a smaller cutting wheel really, but it'll have to do. I've done it so I'm cutting inside the marks. I don't think I'm going to get very far doing it this way. Maybe it'd be easier to drill it. Just going to use this angle bracket to stand it off the desk. Well, clearly this is going to take some time, so I'll see you on the other side. It's not too bad, just needs a bit of cleaning up. That looks okay, I think. Switch is in there pretty solid, but I'm going to put some hot glue around it just for good measure. It'll be useful to be able to disconnect this switch in future, so I'm still going to use these spade connectors that came with it. I'm just going to extend them with these wires. So let's put the back panel back on. I'm going to desolder the live connection into the transformer. Now I'll wrap one of my switch terminals around that post. Then I'm just going to tin the other wire from the switch. Almost forgot the heat shrink. And just in case these new wires create any interference, I'm going to cable tie them to this screw at the bottom here just to keep them out of the way a bit. And with the top cover in place, the new switch looks pretty good. So I've got no doubts this is going to work fine, but let's test it anyway. Plugging it in, and obviously we get nothing, and then reaching around the back. Excellent. So I'd welcome any comments on what I did, whether you thought that was a worthwhile modification or not. Yes, I could have just unplugged it between uses, but I think this is a more elegant solution. But could I have done something more intricate with the tape sensors, or maybe something else? But that's it for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.